Good afternoon, Rotarians around Africa. And let me firstly take this opportunity to thank you all for this kind invitation to address Rotary on this your 100th anniversary of your presence in Africa. And I've been asked to say a few words for the next 14 minutes, I take it now, on the developments in Africa over the last 100 years and what does the future look like over the next 100 years, particularly related to peace and security and stability in Africa. So let me just give you a quick, I hope, a tour de force of what the last 100 years looked like. And if we go back, we've had a period of colonialism in Africa, whether that was French, European, Portuguese colonialism in Africa, that had an impact of, in a sense, disengaging Africans from their own governance and their own governance structures. We had many kingdoms in Africa, and many of those kingdoms were dismantled under the colonial period. The end of the colonial period around the 60s saw the decolonization of the continent, but also a arbitrary drawing of borders that came out of the Berlin Conference a little earlier, that in many ways also created a continent that was destined to be in conflict for a long time because of the arbitrary drawing of borders. Nevertheless, the decolonization process resulted in a number of countries being decolonized and attaining their own independence from around the early 60s, ending with South Africa being one of the last countries to be decolonized, although having its own internal colonization, as we called it. And then came, of course, the independence of Africa. Africa's independence, despite there being this euphoria about a future continent, it was in many ways interrupted by the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, both of which had proxies on the continent and fought a Cold War in Africa that also destabilized the continent. That took us to the early 80s, where the Cold War continued, but there was also the entry of the international financial institutions to try to re-energize the economies of the continent, but that had its own complications that led to more serious governance issues. And then came the 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then 3 decades on the continent where new reconstruction efforts were attempted. Let me also say that we need to take some responsibility on the continent as Africans, where in attempting to reconstruct our countries, a number of our countries have been subjected to endemic corruption, and in some instances, a proliferation of conflicts that some of it were made within the continent by the leadership on the continent, but also Africa became again a victim of geopolitical ambitions of very many large powers around the world. So we find a continent beset with its own problems internally, driven by itself internally, and then largely impacted by geopolitical developments. So that's where we find the continent today. And now, what is the objective conditions that drive developments in Africa? So the first is that if we look at the deep structural problems, Africa has endemic poverty, unemployment, and inequality. These are the deep structural problems. They arise also from the fact that our economies have not transformed over the last several decades from independence, large part of the continent is still agrarian, and it is not industrialized nor moved into the services sector. But whilst this is happening, or this is not happening rather, people are at the same time, we have exponential population growth, and we have people rapidly urbanizing to the center. Now, if you look at Europe's trajectory of development, Asia, Latin America, and many other parts of the world, North America, etc., you find that urbanization coincided with industrialization. So low-skilled farm workers moving to the center were absorbed into low-skilled factory jobs. This is not happening in Africa because of the absence of industrialization in large parts of the continent. And so what we will witness over the next decade or two will be a proliferation of internal conflicts, political and social strife at the center. This is at the large cities. And where there are governments, and there are many on the continent, who don't have complete control over their territory, we will also see the growth of insurgent movements, radicalized insurgencies, criminal syndicates, etc., that occupy a certain part of the continent. Okay, so this presents a fairly bleak picture of the continent, but not all is bleak about the continent. This is a huge continent. In fact, if you take all of Europe, it could fit in one country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You take India with 1.2 billion people, it could fit in the southern part of Africa. So this is a large continent which is not yet overpopulated. We have just over 1 billion people, and in a few decades, we will be around 2 billion people. 1 billion of that 2 billion will be young people. So Africa will be the continent where we will have a young generation that will also be economically, potentially economically active. And so there's huge potential when it comes to the human resources of the continent. Then if we look at the natural resources of the continent, 60% of the world's arable land sits in Africa. So Africa can become the breadbasket of the rest of the world. And we have very good rainfall in parts of the continent where, and we have the huge Congo River, we have the huge Nile River. All of this, together with hydroelectricity that can be produced in these two large rivers, can fire up the continent, industrialize the continent, and commercialize agriculture that could see Africa exporting agricultural products as well as exporting energy into Europe and other parts of the world that need it. In addition, all the conceivable minerals that are needed for the 21st century industries of battery technology, or the space industries, electric vehicles, all of that is found in abundance in Africa. If you take coltan, which is an essential component of the cell phone and the aerospace industry, 60% of the world's deposits of coltan sit here in Africa. If you look at platinum, an essential element for the electric vehicles, again for battery technology, the large percentage of platinum sits in Africa. So there are huge resources on the continent, not leaving aside, of course, that when we look at a consumer base, the largest consumer base in the world will be here in Africa. So what does the next 100 years look like in Africa? I think we will certainly, the next decade or two, we will see a lot of civil strife on the continent, but I think this is an evolutionary process. And largely people like the Rotarians, who have a huge ability to galvanize people on a voluntary basis, but also many Rotarians are part of businesses, they're part of government. And so I think Rotary has a huge role to play to recognize that Africa has huge human potential, natural resources, and that if we galvanize all of that, and if we have the right leadership on the continent, and if we have the right commitment, drive, and passion, that the kind of things that Rotarians bring, we would be able to work together and transform this continent into an oasis that can take its place alongside all of the rest of the developed countries in the world. So I really want to encourage Rotarians as we go into this next 100 years, as you celebrate 100 years of your presence in Africa, and as you re-examine your own contribution in Africa, and as you look at your potential, your membership potential in Africa, and knowing the work of Rotary, not just in the kind of social services, the kind of business enterprises that you're involved in, but also, importantly, Rotary has been involved in peace building and in peacekeeping on the continent. And so we want to encourage you, and as a CORD, the organization that I head, the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, which has a much shorter history. We've been in Africa now for 30 years. We will work very, very closely with Rotary to see that, one, we assist in the stabilization of the continent through peacekeeping and peace building efforts, and we mitigate the conflicts that are there so that we can unleash the potential of the continent and contribute to transformation in the various projects that you engage in, but in many more projects that you can engage in as you grow your membership in Africa and as you review your 100 years and look forward to the next 100 years. So we hope that as a CORD, we can work with Rotary. We congratulate you on your 100th anniversary of your presence in Africa, and we look forward to your presence in Africa for another 100 years. So thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity of sharing with your membership our own experience of the continent over the last few decades and our expectations of where we see the continent of Africa going into the future. Thank you very much.